Hello everybody and welcome to another Tech Thursday. Thank you for joining me if you're in here live. My name is David Smith, if you don't already know, and I'm one of the OM experts looking after you in terms of your OMD and OM system products. Now today's Tech Thursday is going to be all about wildlife features, particularly on the OM-1. I'm going to go through a few things that you may already know, but you might not know. So hopefully if you glean one or two little tips from this live, then that's great. Of course, don't forget you can put your comments in live as well. Ask any questions that you want. So as it says down here, you can ask all your questions in the comments, and I will do my best to answer as many as possible. Bear in mind, I'm on my own, so I can't answer all of them, and I'll be making a few clicks to go over and see different things, so bear with me when that happens. And of course, let me know that you can hear me okay, because it's always a bit of a worry when you're on your own that nobody out there in the great world can hear you talking. So just let me know. And I'll say a few hellos if I can as well along the way. This is a combination of hi, how are you doing? Let's look at some wildlife stuff and ask me any questions about your OM and your OMDs. You can, of course, ask questions about OMDs as well. A lot of people ask me, is everything now centered around OM1? And no, not at all. Always supporting OMD models as well, plus all the lenses. So ask as many questions as you like. Okay, so let me first of all say a few hellos, because there were some questions sitting in the chat ready and waiting for us when we came in here. Oh, there's lots of you coming in. That's fantastic. Keep it coming. And you can share this feed as well, by the way. So if you're watching this on Facebook, you can hit the share button. You can share that to a different group, to photography groups. I may have already done that a couple of times myself. So you'll see it in there as well. And of course, if you're on YouTube, give us a wave as well. Let's look at some of these questions that have come in here. The first question that was sitting here waiting for me was from Christine Gilliam. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Christine is asking about birds in flight. So it's quite a common question, actually, when we talk about things like birds in flight. Christine wants to know if you use CAF or CAF plus tracking, and do you have to refocus often? Well, it kind of depends on what model you're using. So if we think about going back to the only OMD that has bird detection, then you're going to be looking at the EM1X, and in which case you would need to use CAF plus tracking in that camera because it only works with CAF plus tracking. If we think about the newest model, which is the OM1, the bird detection or any other subject detection works in all focusing modes. So more often than not now, we will just be using CAF with birds in flight. And I'm going to give you a couple of demonstrations on how that will work today. In terms of tracking, realistically, I think you should only be using tracking in an OM1 when there is a subject that is not supported by subject detection and it's perhaps sort of coming in this direction towards you or away from you. And that's when the CAF plus tracking will actually work at its best. So if you've got that covered by, you know, the motorsports, aerial vehicles, bird detection, cats and dogs, those kind of things, if they're covered and that's what you're shooting, you can just use that in combination with CAF. We'll have a look at that as well, because I've kind of got some very compliant friends with me today that are going to help us to see how wildlife features on the OM1 work. And by that, I mean, I'm going to be using non-organic birds, which have been placed very delicately for ease of use. Now, you'll have to bear with me with this as well, because the camera is quite smart and it knows that some of these are two-dimensional images. It's not play ball with it, but I do have some three-dimensional ones that are in there as well that it does pick up very, very well. So we'll go over to that when I hit my list. Let's say some hellos. Hello to John, who says it's a rare chance to catch live. Hi, John. Good for you to. Thanks for coming in. We've also got a question from Chris Jackson, and really keep these questions coming because this is the whole idea about Tech Thursdays, is that we'll focus on the subject that we're here to look at today, but you can just kind of throw all sorts out there, and if I can answer them, I will do. Chris is asking. Chris is having issues accurately metering with bird subject detection and wants to know if the spot metering follows the focus points. The spot metering in any of the cameras will only follow the single focus points. So in terms of it metering as a bird moves, it won't do that specifically. But you do have an option in the OM-1 for center weighted and ESP, or evaluative or average metering, to meter on every frame through the sequential burst. And I'll try and remember to pull that up when we look at the camera. But in terms of spot metering, which is very precise, we're not going to be following that through a sequence. It will spot from a single point only in that first frame. Okay. Then we've got J. Mark Strong. Good to see you in here. This is recorded, so if you don't get to watch all of it and you can't sit around for all of it, you can come back and watch the replay later on. Let's see. We've got Margaret, who's a Geordie from Geordieland. Fantastic to have you in, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining us. Stephen Berkowitz. Hello, Stephen. Thanks for joining in. Stephen's asking if subject / mammal, which I'm assuming is going to be dogs and cats detection, is turned on, will it find the eye and focus on that? Yes. So you do have an option for eye detect within your OM-1. It's just below the subject detection option. And I'll show you that when we go over to the camera as well. What the camera is trying to do when it hits the subject detection is, first of all, find the shape that it's been designed to look for. So a dog or a cat. It's then going to try and look for the head. And if it can see an eye within that, it will then narrow that down with the eye box as well. And it kind of goes through those stages. So we'll have a look at that as we go through. Hello, Dave, in sunny Wales. Crikey. That's a turn of the books. It's sunny in Wales. I'm glad to hear it, though. Steve's in Atlanta. Hello, Steve, all the way in Atlanta. I know someone else in Atlanta. I wonder if she's in today. Give us a wave, Margot, if you're in today. You're also in Atlanta. Who else have we got in there? Oh, this is a great pickup, actually. Anders has asked if there are any videos out there about setting up the OM-1 for video, explained for beginners. Not really, but it's a great point to have made. So perhaps that's something that I'm going to put into the little list of things when we try to create content and see if we can pull something up as a beginner's setup for video for the OM-1. So thank you for pointing that out, and we'll put that into our list of things to do. Hello, Greg from Michigan. Good to have you in as well. I genuinely can't say this name. So what I'm going to do, in my whole nerdiness, I'm going to suggest that this is one of the robots on Tatooine, KB1QZH. Nice to meet you. When is AI tracking not worth it? I don't know, really. I mean, AI tracking isn't worth it if the subject is wee tiny in your frame. What I would always say is that if you want to get the best from AI tracking or subject detection, or any type of sort of tracking and focusing, really, it's best if the subject is forming a minimum part of the frame. So for me, if you look at the frame that I'm in now, I would want that subject to be at least this big, which is about as big as your center weighted markers in your camera. If it's any smaller than that, one, the subject detection is really going to struggle to try and distinguish that, particularly if it's on a busy background. And two, is it really worth it for you to then try to crop into sort of 5, 6, 7% of the image and pull out what's there? So I think AI tracking is only not worth it when the subject is so small within the frame. Hello, Barry from where? And hello, Nancy from Florida as well. Oh, and there's Jeff from Durham. Another one in the same direction in Geordieland. Okay, so we've got loads more questions. I'm literally just going to skip through to make sure that there's nobody shouting at me to say I can't hear you, which is normally something that happens. But it all looks good for me from there. And then I'm going to set my marker on the comments so I can come back to those as well. Let's take that ticker tape away because it will just get in everyone's nerves. It rolls across all the way. I'm going to switch a camera on. I've got my OM-1 set up over here. Got my compliant little friends over there as well. And I want to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about, first of all, sequential burst modes, because when you're shooting wildlife, you're going to want to take a burst and you're going to want to take quite a fast burst as well. So we'll look at the sequential modes and what actually is in there in terms of setting them, what everything kind of means. And then I'll move that on and we'll have a little look at AF limiting. So AF limiting is also a really good option to use when you're in wildlife, and not to be confumed. Don't confume anything, but not to be confused with frame limiters. So AF limiters and frame limiters are quite different. So we're going to talk about those as well. Okay, so is my camera on? My camera is on. Let's go ahead and see. There we go. There's my little friends. I have to excuse any squeaky chairs that you hear while I get up to go over to the camera. I've got a few friends in there. Some of them are three-dimensional. Some of them are two-dimensional. They're just, it's really easy now in a studio to bring these compliant friends in to help us out, to demonstrate what's going on. But they're going to sit there just for a moment because I'm going to talk first about sequential mode. So in the OM-1, lovely new menu, of course. For those of you lucky enough to have one, we can head into the menu by pressing the menu button. And then we navigate across these top tabs at the top. And the easiest way to do that is by rolling the front dial where your finger is on the front of the grip. And you can roll across those tabs. Excuse me. And we're going to go into shooting tab number 1, which is camera 1. And I'm going to head across to page 7. And page 7 is all the drive modes, all the options for what the shutter release will do, bursts, timers, silent modes, everything else. So we're going to go down to the sequential shooting settings options, press OK. Just worth pointing out at this stage, on the OM-1 menu, rather than pressing right to go into the menu, you do have to press OK. Except when there's an arrow on the right-hand side, as you see here now with some of these options. Because if I press OK on some of these, there's actually a tick box next to these options, and that means by unticking them, I'm actually taking away the ability to use them in my super control panel, so I need to retick those. So most of the time it's press OK to get into a setting, unless you see an arrow, and then you can press right. So what have we got in here? From the top, we've got a mechanical shooting, mechanical sequential burst, silent sequential burst, SH1, which is super high speed, and that's the fixed AF version, SH1. We'll go into the frames per second shortly. SH2, which is the continual autofocusing option, super high 2. Pro Cap, the time machine, the wondrous time machine function. And it's actually Pro Capture week this week as well for us. So have a look around. We've got loads and loads of content on Pro Capture this week. So have a scoot around our content pages on YouTube and everywhere else. We've got tons of stuff. And somebody not too far away from here might have made a little video on Instagram. You can go and pop along, have a look at that. Pro Cap on its own, Pro Cap High Speed 1 and Pro Cap High Speed 2. So remember, the SH1 options of both normal burst and Pro Capture are fixed AF. They will fix the AF on the first frame and the focus will stay there. It won't refocus between frames. But the SH2 versions of each one will do that. Now, let's go back to the top and assess what these give us in reality. So, mechanical burst gives us up to 10 frames per second. And we can change that in increments of 1 all the way down to 1 if we wanted to. There will be some situations where you might want 3 or 4 frames per second. Your maximum is 10. And in every single one of these sequential options, you can choose a frame count limiter. The frame count limiter works in a really, really simple way. If you press OK, tell it how many frames you want the camera to take. So let's run this down to, say, 20 frames. And press OK. That means that when you're in this mode and you fully depress your shutter, you'll release 20 images. And whilst continuing to press down, once 20 images have been taken, the camera will stop and it won't take any more until you release your finger and go down for another full press on the shutter. And it's a great way to manage memory card space and not take 5 million pictures every time you squeeze the trigger. The next option down is the silent version of that. We're going to achieve 20 frames per second in here, increments of 5 all the way down to 5 frames per second. And again, the frame count limiter works in exactly the same way. I'm going to leave all these off apart from the mechanical frame limiter, just to give you an idea of how that works when I give you a demonstration. So SH1, that is a silent electronic mode as well. It's the super high speed one, 120 frames per second in increments of 60, 100 or 120. So you can choose to get it a little bit slower if you want to. But if you're going to use a high speed, you're just going to full throttle, chuck it out there. 120 frames per second, Kingfishers diving, cannons shooting cannonballs, you name it, real fast stuff. We'll keep that at 120 frames per second. And again, frame count limiter works in exactly the same way. This is a really, really good mode to use your frame count limiter well, because if you press and hold that shutter for half a second, that's 60 images that you've already captured. So if you do want to limit that, that's where you'll do it. SH2, again, another electronic version, max frames per second 50, incrementally 25 or 50. And of course, remember, not every lens is compatible with the 50 frames per second shooting speed. If it's not compatible, it will automatically default to 25 frames per second. So your compatible lenses are things like the 40-150 2.8 Pro lens, 300mm f4, 150-400 Pro f4.5, 12-40 f2.8, not the 100-400, unfortunately. That then takes us into your Pro Capture settings. Now, Pro Cap, standard Pro Cap, is going to give you 20 frames per second. Imagine that this is like your normal electronic shutter burst. And again, excuse me, you can change that in 5-frame increments as you wish. You'll set your pre-shutter frames. This is how many frames the camera buffers when you're doing a little halfway press on that. That's your time machine bit. That's like your TARDIS in action. And then when you fully press the shutter, that's landing your TARDIS to complete a total of whatever number you put in the frame count limiter. And the little graphic at the bottom shows you how that's broken up. So 10 seconds of TARDIS spinning and 10 frames of TARDIS spinning and 40 of everything after that in the present. That works the same in every single Pro Capture version, the only difference being the speed. So Pro Cap SH1 again gives you that 120 frames per second. I highly recommend that your pre-shutter frames are much more in 120 frames per second, because it is likely that what you're shooting is super fast and you will miss it. And Pro Capture SH2, which will work up to 50 frames per second with compatible lenses as well. So really, really, really nice options in there. And you can customize them right down to the point of limiting those frames as well. Now, I set the frame count limiter to 20 shots in mechanical burst mode. So I'm just going to go back over to my live view. I'm going to focus on my little pal up here in the sky. I'm not going to put any bird detection or anything on just now, just for this particular set of the demo, because he's not going anywhere. Look at him. He's quite happy in stasis in the sky. What I'm going to do is press the OK button for the Super Control panel and select that mechanical burst mode just here, sequential burst mechanical shot. And I'm going to fully squeeze this trigger, or the shutter button, all the way down, and we should hear it release 20 shots and then stop. So let's give this a go now. There we go. I'm still pressing the shutter, and it won't take any more shots until I release and press again. So it's a nice way to just hold yourself back a little bit. You do need to train yourself to release though, because otherwise you could potentially miss some shots. Whilst we're in that, and I'm going to come back to the comment section in just a second, because there's tons of you in there. There's loads of people, 440 people. Thank you so much for taking time out your day to join me. We're just going to quickly look at the AF limiter. So we're going to go into the menu. Anything related to AF is in AF tab. So scroll over with my front dial, and we want to look for the AF limiter in page 3, third option down. You can press OK on here, and you'll have several options. If you want to switch the AF limiter on, you'll get a number alongside it. You can switch it to on 1, on 2, and on 3. If I switch it to on 1, I then need to program, excuse me, I need to program on 1 or on 2 or on 3. These are just default program settings. And then the bottom option is the release priority. And this is another thing that sometimes is a little bit misunderstood. The release priority simply means if this is switched on, the shutter will release. You will be able to take an image. You will be able to expose a shot, even if your subject is not in focus. And you might say, well, why do I want to take an out of focus shot, David? Well, if you're taking a sequential burst and you're on shot number 12 of 20 and it can't focus, you don't want it to lock at 12, You want it to take an out of focus shot so that it can move to shot number 13 and potentially regain the focus. So release priority should be on when you're taking a burst. You can switch it off, and that will mean that if the camera can't focus on something, it will not release and expose that shot. But in bursts and sequential bursts, I don't recommend it. I do recommend keeping that on. Now, the other thing that I get asked quite a lot is, well, you know what? AF limiters are great, but I'm not going to run out there with my measuring tape and figure out what's 112 meters, which is the point where I wanted to start focusing. And then the furthest point is 278.5 meters, which is the furthest point that I wanted to focus on, because it's between point A and point B. That's what you're limiting. And you don't have to do that at all, because you have an approximate tool in your camera. And it's buried in the preset manual focus option in the super control panel. So it's related to preset manual focus, but you don't need to use it for preset manual focus. So if we go back to a live view, press OK, and in the super control panel, go to the focusing options and go to pre-MF, highlighting it, and then pressing the info button, we are presented with this calculation screen. Now we can either use the manual focus ring or a halfway press and focus on a point in the distance to work out where things are. So let's figure out, let's focus on my little friend over here in the corner. Halfway press to focus, and you can see at the moment it's defaulted to 999.9 meters. This isn't going to be very far. I think this is going to be about 2 and a bit meters. Halfway press. Oh, it's not focused correctly. There we go. And this is why you should never work with children and animals, because I can't get the focus on that. Let me do this manually. Pull my manual focus ring and go back into my preset MF, which I can't do. This is one of those live moments that goes all wrong. Let's try that again. Manual focus to update. So I'm going to turn my manual focus ring. There we go. Get him in focus. And that's 2.6 meters away. So I would then make a note of that 2.6 meters, and then I might focus on something else further away. And that might be, I don't know, that's out of focus now. That might be 10.2 meters away. So you can use either that autofocus or manual focus to calculate those distances. And then once you've done it, you're simply going to go back into your menu, and you're going to go to your AF limiter, and you're going to program those settings into here. So you can press OK and go, right, well, it was 1.2, sorry, it was 2 point whatever meters it was, 2.3 meters to 10 meters, let's say. And that's a very short focusing distance, but the camera will then not allow any focusing outside of those distances. It will all be inside of those distances. And if you don't work with meters, you can, of course, change it to feet as well. And there you go, 2.3 meters to 10 feet. As an example on a very short scale. I'm just going to switch that off because it will interfere with some other things that we're doing. Actually, if I pop it back on, just show you the live view. If you look in the top right-hand corner, whatever focusing option you have, let's take it back to continual autofocus, you will see that the limit is on, because in green it says AF limit beside that. Okay, so then let's switch that back off. And I'm going to come back over and have a little look at our comments. Let's see what we have in the comments here. So loads and loads of comments, because there are so many of you in here. We've got Michelle from Lee Valley, or Lehigh Valley. That's Lee Valley because that's in the UK. And we've got Jim from Minnesota. Hello, Jim. Jerry from Kent in the UK. Good to have you all in here. Let's have a look. Here's a great question to focus on. Jim and Jeannie ask, can you move the histogram from the upper left corner to the bottom of the viewfinder? No, you can't. It is right there, and it is not movable, unfortunately. It was a simple answer, if not the one that you didn't want. Hello, Sandra from Dumfries. Good to have you in as well. Right, let's have a quick look. We've got Malcolm from Worcester who sat there with you. Recently arrived OM-1. Fantastic. They are coming quicker now. So somebody was asking about stock of OM-1s earlier. They are the supply line is getting better. So we're seeing them flowing a little bit easier now. So people have been waiting. Should be getting them. Annette, hello Annette, good to see you. Annette's in from Sweden. Hi Dave, and then behind the screen. There's no one there, Annette. It's just me and you. That's all it is. In reality, it's not even me and you and 437 other people. It's just me in a room and you, whoever you are, watching. That's it. It's just us. But it's good to see you. Questions. Let's see. Lots of hellos. I wish I could say hello to everybody. But I'll save that for Coffee with the Claires because that's a really social affair. And they get to chat with everybody and things like that. And I do all the nerdy stuff. So I'm going to save all the hellos for Coffee with the Claires. Let's see if we've got any more questions. Oh, people popping in my own links as well there. Just be careful as well. If anybody pops a link in like this one here, don't be clicking links that take you somewhere else. I'm really sorry. Don't do that. You don't need to worry about it. Let's have a look here. Okay, Carl's got a comment here saying that the AI has trouble finding subjects in trees, branches and leaves and on water waves causing issues. So recently we released a firmware update which made a lot of improvements to things like AI subject detection, firmware version 1.2. So you should definitely make sure that your camera has the latest firmware on there and you should hopefully see lots of improvements in those areas. Okay, tons and tons of hellos. Let's see if we can find some questions. Otherwise, I will go back to my list of things that I wanted to talk to you about. Here we go. This is a great one. Hello, Ken. Good to see you. Any suggestions for photographing butterflies with the OM-1? Interesting that you should say that because I hear a lot of reports of people telling me that they successfully used the bird detection AI function with butterflies. And then I've heard some other people come back and be slightly disappointed that it didn't work for them. It isn't designed to work with butterflies because it is bird detection. It may well be that certain butterflies create a pattern that in some instances may look like a bird and it may well just kind of be a fluke. And I've got some butterflies in my little indoor garden here as well. And it definitely does. Bird detection is not triggered by those butterflies or the dragonflies. However, you do, of course, have things like the 40-150 is a great lens for butterflies. And I would suggest that you use a small AF point with continual autofocus, not with tracking because of the way that they're quite flighty and they jump around, but just with normal CAF. Definitely using SH2 because that's the continually autofocusing fast burst as well. And if you have any problems with focusing and you want to go manual, then use something like focus peaking, which is a nice manual focus assistant in there as well. Sounds good. Great. Jill, thank you very much. Always good to know that the sound is coming through nicely. Hi, Roger. I saw Roger quite recently in real life, which was fantastic. Roger's asked, when using CAF, would you use all the focus points or a custom one to suit the subject? There is only ever one instance where I would use all the focus points. And I think now is the time that we should probably have a look at that. Ordinarily, I would use a smaller grid. I would try to always use a grid that was not much bigger than the subject, if bigger at all. So if my subject is that big in the frame, I'm only going to be using a cross or a medium box. If my subject is that big in the frame, I'm going to use a small AF. There is no point using a massive box on a tiny little subject because if there's something behind it or around it, the camera may well look around it and go, I'll take that. If you're not using any software, any AI detection, that is. So Roger, let's take a look at the only reason why I would use all AF points. Let's go back over to my camera. And let's bring this up to, I got some buddies in the sky here, and I'm going to focus here on my pal, Sid the Seagull. He's just here. That's Sid. He's having a great time. He's snooting around looking for chippies, mate. No chippies in here, so you're just going to have to stay where you are, Sid. Right. So the only time I would ever use all AF points is when we use something called the cluster focus or cluster AF. And this is when you're shooting something in the sky, like Sid, because it's a nice neutral background, but Sid might change shape because he could change direction, he could flap his wings, he could have a chippy in his mouth, he could have anything. Recently heard of somebody taking a picture of a seagull that had a ham sandwich in its mouth. Very eager seagull. So on a background like the sky, tap the joystick to a direction, up, down, left, right, until it highlights the AF grid, and then use either of the dials to scroll through to get to all autofocus points. Now, into the menu, and in the AF tab, in page 2, we're going to use the AF area pointer option and change that to on 2, which is basically the description says, displays the green target frame whilst AF lock or CAF plus tracking is running. What it actually does is if you're using single autofocus, it will permanently show you a green box when locked, and it will cluster around the object when in CAF. So once that's set, make sure that you are in CAF mode, and then using either the front button or the back button, however you want to do it, start to focus, and then we get this cluster tracking that's going on just here. So a closer little look at SID there. So the cluster tracking is what's happening. Now, obviously, the camera is expecting SID to be moving, which is why it's focused on the darkest part of his wing there. Now, if you were in real life and that's moving along, then the clustering is going to be going all around the bird as it moves along. And it's a great way to take pictures from below when they're up above you in the sky. And Roger, to answer your question, that is the only time that I would ever use the cluster tracking. If indeed I didn't use the bird detection plus a normal AF grid. It comes down to personal preference in this case. And there you go. That's SID. Thanks very much, SID. Let's bring that back and reset that down here somewhere with these smaller birds ready for something else later on. Okay. Oh, look at that. We've already thrown half an hour of time into the wind. There we go. Thanks for your question, Roger. That was really, really good and led me into something that I was going to demonstrate anyway. So thank you very much. This is a lovely question. Ralph. Hi, Ralph. I hope you are well. Thank you for your question, which is, what is the difference between the file types of ORF and ORI? Well, that just depends. If you're shooting a normal shooting mode, such as anything that's not high resolution, then the ORF is the OM or Olympus RAW file. Okay, so that's your RAW file. However, if you're shooting in high res mode, that could be handheld or tripod based high res mode, the ORF actually becomes the high resolution RAW file, and you get alongside it an ORI. And you just need to think about ORI as standing for original RAW. That's the non-high resolution RAW file that you get when using high res. ORI, original RAW file. And then ORF will be your high res one, but only when in that mode. Thank you for your question. The Spectrum Theatre. What a cool name. Thanks for your question here. Do you always need to hold down AF on when tracking birds in flight? Yes. AF on the back. You'll need to hold it down as you track it. As you release, the continual autofocus will stop. Steve. Hey, Steve from Michigan. Good to have you in. Thanks very much. Don. It's almost as though these questions were posed previously, but they weren't. These are genuinely great questions for me to be able to answer because they come up quite a lot. Don's asked, would the dogs and cats subject detection work with bears? My absolute last word on it is dogs and cats detection is not bear detection. So don't have any expectations that may not materialize. However, there is the potential that in certain angles and things like that, yes, the dog and cat detection could look at a bear with its snout, ears, and identify it as a dog or a cat. There is the potential, but please don't rely on it and don't take those expectations because that's not what it was designed for. If it does, it's a Brucey bonus, and we all love a Brucey bonus as well. And if you're not from the UK, I'm not sure if Brucey bonus translates very well, but hopefully it does. And maybe some of you that are in the UK can explain it in the comments because you've got time and I don't. Hello, John. Hey, John from Buxton. Good to have you in. Let's have a look. Martin as well. Martin uses the cluster pattern on CAF for birds in flight, but is one of the patterns optimized, i.e. 5x5 for tracking? On the OM-1, yes, you can use the smaller grids for cluster tracking. but on OMDs, it is only all AF points that will work on that one. And again, there we go. Eric, another one. Is it better to use dog or cats to photograph beds? Give it a try. Just, make sure you manage your expectations. Peter's in Milton Keynes. Hey, Peter. Good to see you in here. Bruce from Tampa. Excellent stuff. Loads, everyone from all over the world. This is why I love my job, because we are such a global community. There we go. KB1QZH. Let's see how fast I can say your name in the next one. A general question: how to hold a non-gripped body with a long lens? Non-gripped body probably refers to EM5 or even an EM10. And it is difficult. What I would suggest is things like, let's have a look. Most of the lenses will have a tripod plate on there, a tripod collar. Okay, so that's ideally where you're going to be holding from. So you're going to utilize that section there, because if you've got this on an EM10, yeah, it's going to be a struggle, depending on how big your hands are, how strong your kind of wrist muscles are and things like that. It will vary from person to person, but try to utilize the tripod collar on those bigger lenses. Art by Odo. I'm going to be checking that one out later. What's the best way to configure the OM-1 to easily switch between birds in flight and perched birds? The best way is to set up either cluster AF function that we've just seen now, add that to a custom mode, and then cross it over to a smaller grid point, if not a single one, with bird detection, and put that into another C mode as well. So generally speaking, if you're adding bird detection, if there's only one bird in the scene, you can use quite a large AF grid. But if there's more of them, and we'll take a look at that in a second, you'll need to be more specific with your AF fields. But yeah, just putting them in C1, C2, AF, cluster AF for in flight, and a smaller grid point without AF area pointer on 2 for the perched birds. Hans has asked, any news on the release of more of the 150 to 400 zoom lens? No, we haven't already talked about it, but it's a great question. There is a way. If you're not, if you have one on order, I think at the moment you're looking at about sort of 10 to 12 months. The demand is massively high for that. It's a brilliant lens. There we go. Well, I got the right shoulder as well. Normally in reverse, I go like that, and I'm on the wrong side. It is a high demand for that lens, and so we're looking at about sort of 10 to 12 months from point of ordering. Okay, so make sure if you want it, get an order in. That's the only way to do it. Okay, let's have a look. One more question as I go through. Here's a great one from John. Picking up on spot metering. If you're quick enough, how about metering on the spot, hitting AEL? Yes, and also in a really, really fantastic way, you can change the way the camera meters depending on which button you press. So you can have evaluative or center weighted metering from the halfway press of the front shutter button, and then separately the rear AEL button could spot. It could be set completely different. So whether or not you wanted to spot or center weight, you can press one of those 2 buttons. Let's have a quick look on the camera. I have to remember now where to find this one. So let's see. Going to go into, I'm going to say, if I remember rightly, my, here we go. Metering in page 5 of tab 1. So we have AEL by half pressing the button. If you go into here, you've got AEL performed by half pressing the button. So you can remove or add that in there as well. You can also, bear with me, there is definitely, I must remember where that extra setting is. So bear with me 1 second. There is a very specific setting for that one. We might be in the AF mode. Let's see if we can find this together. It's not in there. I may have to come back to you guys on this one, actually. And somebody might also have it in the comments. Let's come back to that one whilst my brain remembers where exactly the split for those buttons is, John, but it is definitely there. And if I can't remember it during the duration of the live, I will come back in and pop it in the comments as well. just proof that I can't remember everything. It's so much fun remembering OMD menus and OM-1 menus, but I do love the OM-1 menu. Charles, how are you, Charles? Haven't seen you for a while. Birds in flight, is it best to use the cross or the full screen? Again, I think we covered that in terms of if you're using cluster AF, you can use the whole AF screen. If you're not, use a smaller AF grid. Ultimately, the more precise you are, the more precise the camera will be. You can give it some flexibility, and particularly with subject detection, if there is one bird up there and you have subject detection on and you identify the whole AF field, it's going to see the bird and it's going to go for it. Okie dokie, let's see. Susie, hey Susie, beginner's guide to video. That's 2 thumbs up for that in the bag. William wants a book. We've got a manual. That's the book that we write. So you can download a PDF manual. That's our book. And then, you know, lots of people do create books for these products. And I hear that some of those are on the way as well. In fact, actually, I think there is a guide out at the moment by the fantastic Phil Norton. So have a little look out for Phil Norton's online PDF guide. I think I saw that the other day, which I'm sure if it's from Phil will be fantastic. Okay, so, right, let's go back to look at my list and what I wanted to cover with you. So we looked at sequential modes. We've looked at the AF limiter. We've looked at the frames per second in the sequential modes, the frame limiters in sequential modes. Let's see. Let's look at subject detection, and let's look at the difference of how the camera picks a subject depending on what AF fields you've got going. So here we go. First thing we want to do is I'm going to just make sure I'm using the right AF point. I'm going to bring this down to, in fact, no, there we go. Yeah, we'll keep it on all AF points because this is to kind of show you what happens when there's lots of subjects in the frame that the AI can see, okay? So let's go into the menu. AF tab, page 2, subject detection. And we spoke earlier about, somebody asked about taking photographs of dogs and cats. Will it pick up the eye? If you've got the eye detection frame on, yes, it will. But in subject detection, let's go into here and let's go to birds and the bottom center, press OK. Little halfway press on my shutter will take me back now to my live view screen. You can see, there we go. We got all these little white boxes. All the white boxes are simply telling me that the camera can see an object that it's been asked to look for. And in this case, it's birds. You'll see that some of them are flickering, depends on the angle and whether or not it can actually see the bird. And this also brings me on to the point I made earlier about them being too small in the frame. And if they are too small in the frame, let's focus on this little fella down here. If they were too small in the frame, it wouldn't see him, okay? We come right back and refocus onto this frame here. You see how it's not quite sure that he's there, but he's taking up 5 or 6% of the frame, you know, and is that an ideal part of the frame that you want to use? So anyway, here's all of our white boxes. The one that the camera is currently prioritizing is the white box that has extra corners attached to it, which is that big guy in the middle. And the reason why it's looking at the big guy in the middle is because we're using all AF points and the camera is prioritizing a central subject in the frame. It wants to keep you in a good composition in the center. Okay, so if I move this around without pulling any cables out, I'm going to move that around to here, and you can see that as I change the central point of my frame, the camera then also chooses to look at a different subject. I'm just going to bring the exposure down on that just so that it's not too blown out for you guys to see. And you can see there it's selecting a different central subject as I move around. Even if I go up here, that's in the center. And Sid the Seagull's not, but if I carry on going up, when Sid is in the center, it will take him. And that's what happens when we use all AF points. Now, if we were taking a shot like this, and we wanted to prioritize the bird that's on the right of the screen, which the camera isn't currently prioritizing, we need to use a smaller AF grid, okay? So knock the joystick in a direction to bring up your grids, and turn your dial to a smaller point. I tend to use either middle or cross. Sometimes I'll use cross because I can get away with putting the edges on it. And as you can see, as I move that across the different white boxes, it's then me telling it what subject to pick. Okay, so let's pick that large one there. And we only need to be sort of around or on it. Okay, and you'll see that the double-edged corners have now locked onto that. If I then use my AF on or my halfway press now, oh, we've still got cluster tracking on. Let's turn that cluster tracking off. There we go. Page 2, AF area pointer. Let's set that to on 1. There we go. And let's try now. There we go. So you can see that very brief flash of the green. That's found the bird's head / eye, if it could see it. And as I kind of move my camera around, it kind of wants to stay there. Now, if I use a smaller grid and I've given it a bird to choose, it will do that. It will pick that bird. But if I move that smaller grid around, if I put this into the empty zone over here somewhere, where there is no bird, and now use my halfway press or AF on to focus, it's going to prioritize where my grid is, because I'm effectively telling it not to focus on anything else outside of my grid. So if I now use my AF grid, it's focusing up there in the, let's just take that histogram away. It's focusing there in that top left corner, and it's completely ignoring the birds because I've told it to. As I bring it back to a bird, and I can halfway focus. So that's how you're going to take control over that subject detection when there's more than one bird in that scene. Okay, and you can use this with your sequential burst. You can use it with Pro Capture. Lots and lots of other different options as well. Okay, I still haven't got a new chair. I don't know if any of you remember. This is quite a squeaky chair. It's been squeaky for months. I did try a bit of WD-40 to oil it, but it didn't really work very well. All right, so hopefully that helps with understanding the difference between using all the AF points and using a smaller grid and prioritizing different birds. Oh, fantastic. Oh, look, we've got an explanation. KB1QZH. Getting faster every time. It's a radio call sign. There's nothing wrong with being a nerd, KB1QZH. I love it. Thank you very much for clarifying that one. Barry. What subject detection for dragonflies, wasps, bees, etc., or the best setting when using Pro Capture when a good size in the frame? So as I said about the bears, bird detection would be one that people are suggesting for dragonflies, bees, wasps, butterflies, but it's not dragonfly, bee, wasp, butterfly detection mode. So manage your expectations correctly. When using Pro Capture, I would definitely either use a cross or a small square when they're taking up a reasonable size of the frame, and Pro Capture SH2, so it's refocusing as that insect tracks along. That would be my recommendation. Hello, Paula in Reno. Let's have a look here. This is a great question. Roger, why is the shutter silent when completing a Pro Capture sequence? It's because Pro Capture is a silent feature. Pro Capture operates via the electronic shutter and therefore no noise whatsoever. Okay, so there's nothing in there. And unlike some manufacturers, we don't give you the option to apply a noise to electronic or silent shutter. We do believe that it should remain silent. Because I'm not quite sure why you really want a noise in silent shutter, other than to give yourself the confidence that you've taken the shot, which I can understand completely. Let's have a look at what else we've got, because we are swiftly running out of time. It's absolutely crazy. Tim, what's the quickest way to activate Pro Capture? The quickest way to activate Pro Capture is to have it programmed into a custom mode. Switch to that mode on the dial, and there you are, ready to go. Halfway press for Pro Capture is going to start buffering up that TARDIS, that time machine. It has to be from the halfway press on the front button. Pro Capture does not buffer from the back button at all, but have it on a custom mode, and that's the best way to do it. Thank you very much. And then Fred. Hey, Fred. Fred, when charging from a power bank, have you got to use the cable provided? No, but you need to use a power delivery cable. So you may have bought a power bank that has a very good power delivery cable in there. Fred, if you bought I think you bought the one that I recommended, which is a Charmast one. That does have a power delivery cable in there, so you could effectively use that to charge. But if not, then you should be using the one that comes with your camera. If you're using it for data, such as firmware updates or transferring to PC, computer, whatever else, definitely use the cable that came with your camera. And then we have, oh, there we go. OM System was in here saying, hi, everybody. Looking forward to a great show. Hopefully it's been a great show. Hopefully it's been interesting. I've got one more part of the demo and the cameras that I want to show you before we probably end the session. So I'm just going to have a quick look. Oh, this is a great one that I'm just going to do before we do that demonstration from Steve. Steve's got a single red pixel appeared on the EM-1 Mark II, right in the center of the frame. Does this mean the sensor is on its way out? Absolutely not. This is just a stuck pixel, probably because you might have done a few long exposures or something like that. But what you want to do is find the pixel mapping option. Let me grab an OMD and remind myself of where that is. So in the option 4, I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can see exactly where it is. In your menu, under the gear icon, let's see if that will focus there, you have gear icon J1 pixel mapping. And if you go into there and press OK and run pixel mapping, your camera will go click, bzz, click, 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 click. It'll do all sorts of funny noises for about 30 seconds. And then hopefully your little red dot should have disappeared and I've just reset those pixels for you. Fantastic stuff. Aslibman, does cat subject detection work with big cats? Yeah, really big ones. Lions and leopards, yeah, absolutely. That is what it was designed for in mind. Right, let's take a look at the last thing that I wanted to show you, maybe a couple more questions before we end the session. Okay, let's talk about custom buttons because you want to switch on subject detection on and off. You don't want to have to keep going menu, AF, tab 2, subject detection, off. Okay, it's a bit of a rigmarole. So let's look at customizing buttons and how those button works, okay? Into the menu, OM-1. The beautiful slick menu. Front dial to navigate over to the gear tab. First option in there, or incidentally, you could also go to the shortcut manner. The shortcut way to this is by pressing OK for the super control panel and hitting that gear there. Takes you straight to your button functions. I will demonstrate these button functions on the record button just because it's a demonstration. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best one for you. You need to find the ones that work for you. So onto the record button, which is by default set to the high res mode. I'm going to press OK. I'm going to find subject detection, which is a little cube inside 4 corners. That's subject detection. And a lot of these buttons, when we customize them, will have a press and hold feature. So let's add that in by pressing OK. Subject detection is on the red record button. Let's go back to a live view. Now, when I press and hold that record button that's now subject detection, and at the same time, whilst pressing and holding it, turn the rear dial with my thumb, the subjects come up at the bottom. So I can click through and choose the one that I want. And then when I land on the one that I want, I can let go. That's now on. You can see in the top of the frame, there's a little bird in brackets. And if I now press the red record button just once, it turns it off, and press it once again, and it turns it back on again. So that is a really quick way to get to that. And there are lots of custom buttons that have that press and hold functionality. So let's just go back in and look for a couple more. Let's have a look at, for example, a really great one that I like, where is it now, is ND, live ND. So not specifically a wildlife function, but live ND shooting. If I apply that to that button, when I go back to a live view, if I press and hold my button and turn the rear dial, I now get the ND level options in here. So ND2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and 64. And if I release, it leaves me on there, ND64. And then if I press the button quickly once, it's off, on, and off. So look through your custom buttons, and most of them will have some form of press and hold option to change the feature sets within them. So really, really multifunctional. Okay, what time we got? Oh, wow. Time absolutely flies on these sessions. Can you believe we've been doing these sort of sessions for 2 years now? It's absolutely incredible. So many hellos. Who we got? Peter in Australia, Noor in Canada. This is brilliant because we've now got the radio nerds giving out their call signs. So Frank has come in to say hello to KB1QZH. He's KG4KRK. Fantastic stuff. We're bringing people together. This is what I love about it. Jeff in New Jersey. Oh, Jow. Hey, Jow. Jow's in from Portugal. Good to see you. Paul from Aberganevi. Let's see. I'm just trying to pick out another question that is going to be really useful to everybody. Got to bring it up. Of course. Oh, yeah, there we go. The TARDIS reference. There's usually a TARDIS reference. There's usually TARDIS lying around here everywhere. Just very quickly for Susan, who may have missed the explanation earlier on, the difference between SH1 and SH2 is the speed and the focusing options. So SH1 will shoot up to 120 frames per second, but it's fixed AF on that first frame. It's going to lock. It's like a zone focus. So perhaps on a feeder, 1 point, 120 frames per second at that fixed point. SH2 will shoot up to 50 frames per second, but it will continually autofocus between frames if you need it to. Okay. I got some brownie points with the office look. I think this is fantastic. So the office like my creative birding scenery. And I'm going to drag this around the UK with me now. So anybody that's going to see me around in the UK doing any events anywhere, I'm just going to drag all this foliage and all these birds with me because they're the best thing for demonstrating. Okay, so many other hellos and questions, but I am running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and come back in afterwards and try and pick up on some of these comments if I can too. I'm even getting advice here about lubricating my chair. So I'm going to take some notes of that as well. But I want to say thank you. We've maintained a massive audience tonight, and thank you so much. Loads of love that's been coming through. Really, really good to see you all. Tech Thursday next month is going to be a little bit later. In the UK, September's a very busy month. We have things like the photography show here and stuff like that. So there's loads and loads of stuff going on in September. So it's a little bit later on, and I'll advertise it so you'll all know the dates, and I'll make sure that we put it online so that everybody can see when Tech Thursday next month is going to be. But as usual, thank you so much for coming in and listening to me waffle on about nerdy stuff and, you know, bring radio operators together and things like that. I'll try and answer all of your questions. But if you need anything in the meantime, reach out to your local OM person, whoever's in your region. And of course, we're always happy to help our global family. So until the next time, take care, keep taking photographs, and I'll see you in a little while. Bye for now.